Welcome back to the main stage. I'm Chuck Harry. I'm NIC's Chief Operating Officer, and it's my pleasure to serve as your main stage MC during this session and the next few. Following our conference theme, this session provides insights into action by addressing ancillary services, which expand a skilled nursing provider's service offerings to better serve patients both during and after inpatient stays. Such services also diversify risk and can materially boost the bottom line. Therefore, this panel asks, can you afford to not be in the game? Our moderator for this session is my associate and NIC Senior Principal, Bill Kaufman. Bill, the stage is yours.
All right, well, thank you, Chuck, and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. I think we have a fantastic panel here today. We do have a lot of material to cover, and we, of course, were joking before when we were prepping for this, we could probably sit here all day and talk about it, but I think we've narrowed it down, some of the topics we want to cover, and we'll probably open it up 10 minutes before we end for some Q&A with the audience with the microphones. So I think we'll jump right in here. Love to give the panelists an opportunity here to give some background and introduce themselves and their companies as it relates to the ancillary discussion we're going to have today. And Lori, love to start with you.
Sure. Thanks, Bill. My name is Lori Thomas, and I am a rehab person by background, a physical therapist. I've been involved in the senior space for about 40 years. Currently, I'm the COO for Consanas Healthcare. It's a part of Marquee Companies, which is based out of Portland, Oregon. CEO is Phil Fogg, who's a fourth-generation owner-operator. And our Marquee facilities, we have 27 SNFs, ALFs, memory care, independent living, primarily in Oregon, a couple locations in Vegas and one in California. On the ancillary side, we have a rehab company and a pharmacy company that we've had for 25 years. So we've been in the ancillary business for a long time. We also have a home health and hospice that's primarily focused on our facilities in Oregon. And then most recently, we started a insurance plan, an I-SNP, and the group is called Age Right, with advanced care practitioners and an insurance product as part of our PAC network in the state of Oregon. So a lot of different ancillaries going on in our space.
Amy.
Great. Hello, everyone. I'm Amy Kazak, Executive Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for Curana Health. Curana Health provides on-site primary care services for senior living residents. Our comprehensive care models include things like care coordination, 24/7 coverage, telehealth, palliative care services, and of course, primary care nurse practitioner visits for residents. We fund that very comprehensive care model through our accountable care organizations and Medicare Advantage plans. And we've worked with partners like Marquee, like NHC, to expand out that model and those funding mechanisms so that they and others can participate in kind of this patient-centered care, so building out a lot of the support services for residents using Medicare Advantage, or in some cases, ACO savings to help fund those initiatives. So Curana Health, we're not an operator. We are not an ancillary service provider. At this point, you might be asking, well, why is Amy on this panel? I think some of that has to do with the fact that we work with over 1,400 senior living communities today. We provide services and programs that directly support senior living residents and that provide additional revenue streams and business opportunities for operators. We're often in the position of deciding when to add new service lines, like behavioral health, for example, to our model. We've learned that we need to have flexibility in our partnerships. We've learned the importance of choosing the right partner. And we've also learned when it makes sense to not partner and to develop things on our own. So all of that to say that we have both observed a whole lot of different ancillary strategies, some that have worked very well, others that have not been as successful. But we've also developed a lot of different partnerships and joint ventures on our own. So I'm excited to be part of this panel because, first of all, Bubba and Lori are going to have a lot of very good insights to share and interesting models. So I'm interested to hear more about that. But also because ancillary services are such an essential part of that whole person or patient-centered care. So I think about it like kind of a wheel with the patient at the middle. And ancillary services help fill in some of those spokes that make everything run very, very well. So I think this is an important conversation, and my goal is to help share some of the things that we've observed, as well as some of the things we've learned directly as a company about partnerships, about choosing the right strategies, and hopefully contributing to your thoughts about getting into the ancillary game. Bubba?
Yeah. So I'm Bubba McIntosh. I'm Senior Vice President of Ancillary Services and Service Line Strategy for National Healthcare Corporation. I've been with them about 7 years. Prior to that, I worked in the acute care sector and have always had my finger in some level of ancillary services. When I joined NHC, I was really taken by kind of the foundation that was started by Dr. Carl Adams. And those of you that don't know much about NHC, Dr. Adams was a local physician there in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, who purchased 14 skilled nursing facilities out of receivership. But he was really a visionary. He always believed that if you put the patient in the center of everything you did, the money would follow. And so today, NHC operates 68 skilled nursing facilities. We have 23 assisted livings, 5 independent living communities, But more importantly, I guess, to this discussion, our ancillary services, we operate 3 behavioral health hospitals. We have 35 home health agencies. And I'll mention Dr. Adams started our home health agency in 1976. That was the first home health agency in the state of Tennessee, and really is a continuum for those patients that would be leaving our skilled nursing facilities. We also have, we own a rehab company. We employ about 1,500 therapists that deliver care in our facilities, as well as we contract those with other facilities and with some of the school systems. In addition to that, we operate 4 regional pharmacies that primarily serve our facilities, but also we contract with some smaller providers in our states that we serve. We have 31 hospice agencies, and as Amy alluded to, in 2016 we launched NHC Advantage, which is an iSNP that we partnered then with Ally Line Health and now Curana Health, and it's been really a fantastic addition to our company. We started in the state of Missouri, and we've expanded that into Tennessee and now into South Carolina, and so we've got about 1,200 members in our plan at this point. And then finally, we also provide some financial and accounting services to third-party providers as well. So we try to do it all in-house, although there are some services that we still contract for, but most everything NHC tries to operate within our walls.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for that. Before we get into some of the more specific questions, just kind of kicking it off here from the business context, would love to hear how you all think about it, just in terms of, what are the reasons to think about the ancillary businesses in terms of why it mitigates risks, what are the benefits overall? Would love to just talk about that high level and then get into some more of it, more of the detail. Lori, love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I think if you think back to the history of what we did with our organization, for a while, Phil was contracting out the rehab and pharmacy services. That's kind of where it began. And I think it was really a quality initiative. He wasn't happy with the quality he was receiving, and he said, I think we could do it better ourselves. And so started the rehab company 25 years ago to provide rehab for our marquee facilities, and then it expanded out to external contracts. And then 20 years ago, went through the same process with pharmacy and said, I think we can do a better job, and started a pharmacy in Portland. From over the last 20 years, we've expanded to 10 pharmacies covering 12 states and servicing about 750 communities outside of our own marquee facilities. And so it began as a quality initiative, and Phil has always believed in not only impacting quality in his own communities, but for the industry, and felt like if we do a good job with our own communities, let's spread that out and share that and do a good job for other people as well. So that kind of was the initiation of it. And then it became kind of a diversification strategy, because if you think about the ups and downs that we've experienced in this business over the last 20 to 30 years, there are lots of ebbs and flows. And so having additional businesses, sometimes when the SNF business is down, the rehab business might be better, then PDPM hits, and now the rehab's down, and then maybe pharmacy does better. And now it seems like everything's getting squeezed, but it served as a good diversification strategy. And then around that same time, 2017, as we started actually early in Oregon, with managed care being such an early adopter in that state, started realizing the value-based payment things that were coming around, and why not have more control over that? So looked at an iSNP, looked at advanced care practitioners, so that we could control our own results. And so it's kind of gone in a cycle of sorts to where when you're making a decision about whether or not to add an ancillary, you're usually not doing it for some financial windfall. We've been doing this a long time, and it's hard work, and it's not a windfall. But if you're doing it for the right reason, I think Bubba mentioned, if you're doing it with the patient in mind and you're helping the patient live the best rest of their life and age in place, then it makes sense. If it makes sense to add an ancillary, that's a good motivation for doing it, not because you think you can make more money off of it. So that was, kind of the approach, if you look over the last 20, 25 years, how we got to where we are today.
Wonderful. Bubba, how about from your perspective?
I'll jump in too, and tag on what Lori said is, I think of healthcare in many ways as kind of running a relay race, and where do you lose that race? And it's when you drop that baton. And so being able to provide these ancillary services and a smooth handoff from one delivery model to the next, I think is always better for the patient. We have elected to keep a lot of these in-house, but there are great providers out there too that contract. We also have been fortunate enough that we've been able to make the investments in ancillary services, and that's not an option for some of the smaller providers. So, I think when you just think of ancillary services, it's really about supporting that physician and nursing care model. I mean, when you put that in the center, and these ancillary services just kind of feed into that and provide that support to deliver better care.
Well, I'll comment here on some of what I've heard, but also, again, some of what we've observed as we've worked with senior living operators across the board. You know, I think that the first word that kind of jumps out to me, or the key theme here, is control. And being really strategic and thinking about what is essential for you to control in order to have the best outcomes for your residents and for your business. So, you know, what's first, prioritization, but also, again, around what should you really be controlling, because it is that important. And then I think beyond just the control, whether it's ancillary services or really any partnership or a new business line you might be starting, I don't think it's about starting to solve one specific problem that is very immediate. I think it's about looking at the big picture, and I hear this time and time again from operators that we work with. Yes, maybe they added in therapy or a home health or a pharmacy or a lab because there was some opportunistic value to add that then. But it's also because they have their big picture map and they're completing part of their picture, part of their care model, part of their long-term strategy. So that's where we see these partnerships or new business lines that you may be developing yourselves. That's where we see them really being successful, when they are part of your long-term success. And you know, time and time again, like I think about our plan partners, for example, our successful plans are the ones who didn't think about how is this plan going to help increase my skilled Part A revenues over the next 24 months. Our successful partners are the ones who are thinking, how is this going to help me transform my business over the next 10 years? So I think that long-term approach is really important here.
Well, thank you for that perspective, and I think that sort of leads us into another question before attempting to add these different ancillaries. And would love to just talk specifically about a couple of them, pharmacy and rehab. And Lloyd, would love to hear, you know, before attempting to add these, what are the things to think about and to consider before you're going to do that for some of the folks in the audience that might be thinking about that?
Well, I think, again, I've been in this space for a long time, and my entire experience has been with contracted service. So I have a perspective, you know, being part of a provider group, several at points in my career, as well as the contracted services. And I think the most important thing to think about is why. Right. You know, what is your motivation for doing it? What do you hope to accomplish? And be really crystal clear on that. As a small provider, you also have to go in with your eyes open on what investment is required to be able to add those services. A big question is, do you have the bandwidth internally with your leadership team to be able to handle additional product lines? And do you have the expertise? You know, the expertise required to run a pharmacy or to run a rehab company is very different than running a nursing home. And while it may seem tempting to say, let's do this ourselves, if you don't have the right resources and expertise in place, it's going to be very hard for it to be successful in the long term. Again, looking into the future, not just what makes sense for me in the next 12 months. And again, it can be tempting, especially if you're contracted with someone who isn't doing a good job. I think that's the first time we see people going, let's just do this ourselves. But again, you really have to think about why. Because your current provider sucks is not a good reason to start your own ancillary service. There might be a better service out there that can do the job. As you become larger, if you're a large organization, you know, 25, 30, 50 communities, it may make more sense for you to do make the kind of investment necessary to do that, add the kind of resources, the overhead positions that can handle those things that require expertise. On the pharmacy side, there's a much larger capital investment and a much longer tail to when you become profitable. A lot of things to consider there. On the rehab side, it's more working capital that you're dealing with, a small amount of initial investment in equipment and IT technology kind of things. But the challenge there is people, is can you find a therapist? Do you have a robust recruiting resource to help identify staff so that you have appropriate staff in place? But I think the biggest thing is understanding for either rehab or pharmacy what scale is going to be required to make it successful so it's not a money loser. Understand your why and be really clear on what the expectations you have of your team and your capabilities to head that direction. And those are big questions, and when you look at over the course of years who's been successful and who's not been, in reflecting back, I think understanding why you're doing it and what you hope to accomplish is really critical.
Yeah, and I would add on to that. I think it's not just about having your resources that you are investing up front and thinking about those first capital dollars.
Right.
You need to be in it for the long haul. You need to be thinking about what are you going to need to continue to invest to keep up with the industry, to keep up with the regulatory changes. I mean, especially pharmacy and therapy these days, there's a lot going on. And so it's the initial investment, but then it's also the commitment that you are going to stay at the forefront, especially if this is going to be something that you're not just doing for yourself, but you are thinking about sharing with your friends and family network. So I think it's going a little bit beyond and thinking ahead, and then bringing in the experts in those areas to make sure that you're successful up front and, again, successful long term.
And Bubba, from your perspective, when adding these ancillary services, what do you believe is best in terms of developing it in-house or using a third party? How do you think about that?
Well, obviously, we have many of our ancillaries that we operate in-house, but we still contract for medical imaging and PICC line insertions and a lot of those things that we've not brought in-house. And so I think it really comes down to two things. I think one, it's a philosophical decision of your organization of how much control you want to have over these services. Yep. But then the other part of it is economics. I mean, it's, financially, can you afford to invest the capital? As Lori shared, I mean, we have a great deal of capital invested in our pharmacies. And it's not just when you set it up. It's constantly. You have to keep all that equipment going. The courier services, they're very expensive as well. And so, I think any provider that's considering adding these really needs to sit down and put together a business plan. Do your research with other providers that have these. Maybe there's an opportunity for you to partner with someone that's already doing these services that you have a relationship with. But I think understanding all of these pieces that are required to make a successful operation really need to be researched and vetted before you make the decision to pull the trigger.
Yeah. Well, and I'll comment again. I think sometimes there's a middle ground also, right? It's not always you have to do it on your own or it has to be a third party. A lot of times it can be a joint venture or a partnership approach. Now, there's a lot of things to consider if you're thinking about taking on a partner, but we're certainly seeing a lot of that, and I could see where it could make sense in a capital-heavy investment potentially to come together. It's helpful also for some of the ancillary service lines and also for just healthcare services in general to have some density of population, so being able to bring together a larger group through a partnership, I think that could be a strategy that makes a lot of sense. But with that said, again, I think the caution here is whether you're getting into it on your own or thinking about a partnership, this can't be a side gig. It needs to really be something that you're not just engaged with, but you are all in on to make successful over the long term. And thinking about, you know, I think with new partners, it's always good to ask, what do you want to be when you grow up? So thinking about how is this really going to contribute to your overall strategy? And then it does start creating a virtuous cycle. I think a lot of times this idea that, great, you have therapy, now pharmacy, behavioral health, maybe some other things that you can bring in as a product line, and now everything seems to start working a little bit better, at least from my observations.
Right. And I'll tag off of something both of you said. When you're looking at partners, whether that's someone that's going to consult with you or someone you're doing a joint venture with, I think one of the most critical things is making sure that you're aligned. Do you have the same vision? Yep. Is your why the same? Are there ways to create synergies? We've noticed this particularly in Oregon. Oregon, and some of you probably are in states somewhat similar to this. It's been heavy managed care for a long time. The critical mass piece is really important, and we just happen to be in a situation where there are a few large providers, and we're all part of a network. We're all part of the Age Right plan and the advanced clinical practitioners. Even though we're competitors, we're all working together, so there's synergies. So when you've got partners where you can find those synergies, it can expand the value of the overall picture. Without, again, it's probably, you're not going to have some windfall of starting this business over here if it's not connected with all the other pieces, with the patient in the center. If you find the right partners, it can really add a lot of value to the overall piece of what you're trying to accomplish, especially in areas where you have critical mass. So.
You know, I'll mention, Bill, also that our, as a provider, I guess, our model is often that we run our buildings. And so when you're bringing in another service, for example, an iSNP, you know, that's bringing in an MA plan is contrary to what those operators have been taught all these years. Is, you know, you try to grow that Part A business, and now we're going to invest in one ourselves. And so I think there's a lot of education that's part of it. Again, we came in with the idea of creating behavioral health. We knew that service was needed. We see these patients in our buildings all the time, but being able to let go of those patients out of your census to move them into a facility that's more appropriate for them is sometimes hard for administrators to do. And so there has to be a lot of education on the front end, I think, as before you move into these ancillary services.
So sticking on that topic of education, the expansion of the ancillary services beyond your own skilled nursing base. But let's talk a little bit about that. I'd love to start with you, Lori, in terms of what the key components are that you would think about in terms of expanding beyond your own SNF base.
When you make a decision to say, okay, we're taking care of our own communities, now let's help take care of others. If you've got a good established product that can be competitive, you have to ask yourself that question: what are others doing in the space, and do I have a product that people would find value? What's my value proposition? Why would they want to contract with me versus somebody else? And make sure you understand what that value proposition is. Otherwise, it's kind of hard to sell, unless it happens to be your buddy next door that needs a rehab provider, right? Or someone that you have some other loose association or network with. So that's the first question, is what do I have to sell? And is there a place for it in the market? Go in with your eyes wide open. Again, if you don't have everything perfectly aligned, it can be very hard to make it profitable. because there's one or two things go wrong and you can end up thinking, why did I do this? So you need to make, because they'll require more resources, more overhead, more expertise. And I think that the third thing, and the thing that I've realized probably more on the pharmacy side, is that when you're doing ancillary services for yourself, you probably know what the expectations are, and you're probably aligned. You probably know what the vision is and what results you're going after. You have the same why. Once you start going outside of your house, you're going to end up with people that have different expectations, different values, different goals. And to manage that, and I'll give you an example on the pharmacy side. So we're servicing 700 plus communities across the country. And you might think, well, you probably have some chains, and so the chains probably have similar expectations. We have 253 different parent entities that are our customers. So think about managing 250 different sets of expectations that want different reports, different delivery times, different packaging, different whys. And you have to know that once you go out of house, depending on how big you want to go, that becomes not only a challenge initially, but it's an ongoing challenge on how am I going to continue to be an exceptional service provider, exceed expectations from my customer, and still keep my sanity.
Yeah, so I don't know that I have a whole lot to add there other than I agree 100%. Working with a lot of different providers is a great opportunity. But you need to get in with not just every parent organization, but at the community level, there's a lot of development that takes place when you are selling a product out to more people. So we could talk a whole lot about account management, but it's really, I think it's more than that. I think it is going back to being really upfront with people about your success metrics, and together how you are going to measure those. And this works both ways, whether you are selling your product lines to somebody else or somebody else is selling those product lines to you. Think about the questions that you would want to have answered. How are you going to make sure that you are measuring success the same way? And how are you going to make sure that you are updating your success metrics over time? And I would also go one step further and say, what are the opportunities if you're thinking about a partnership or taking on new partners? What are the long-term opportunities to double down on that relationship or to grow? So what is that partner bringing to the table where in 5 years they're going to be ready to go to the next opportunity together, or grow out from that iSNP to a CSNP? Or move out your product to your 250 best friends in the skilled or senior living sphere. So yeah, I think there's a lot to think about when you are selling out. But I've also seen, and I'd love to get some feedback from y'all on this, I think you learn a lot also though when you start trying to sell your product lines or expand some of your products to other people. I mean, Bubba, did you see that like for your accounting businesses? Did you see things that you were like, oh yeah, we didn't really think about that for us?
Yeah, and, one of the things, and I think Lori hit on it, is it's all about expectation. And they have to be realistic expectations, because to us, nobody is more important to our operations than us. Our expectation is whoever comes in is going to deliver what we want them to deliver. Well, to Lori's point, if they're delivering services to all these different providers, same thing with our relationship with Curana Health. We ask for things all the time. Well, that may not be the way that they're operating, And so we have to have realistic expectations around, you know, what do we want from them? And we have to know that going into it. You can't go into a partnership thinking that you're the most important person at the table.
I'll add to what Bubba said too, when I think about going out and selling outside of your own house, you have to be aware of the competitive landscape. What are the other rehab companies, pharmacy companies offering? And can you meet those expectations if they're baseline? And then you have to be really disciplined around right customer, right terms. And not just say, I'm going to go out and sign 100 new contracts, because you won't be successful doing that. You'll also not be successful going in, well, this is how we do it at our place, and we're going to do that for you. And they're like, but that's not what we want. And what are the other competitors in the space offering? Can you meet that value proposition? Is there something special that differentiates yourself? You have to look at it just like standard sales of anything. You have to be really aware of who you're selling against, and you have to be really, I've learned the hard way, you sign up a bunch of contracts and you end up losing it the next year because you didn't make a good decision to partner with the right people to begin with. The other thing that has been a tremendous impact over the last couple of years is all of the churn in leaders and ownership. So you sign up with ABC company to be the rehab and the pharmacy provider, and you find out, usually the day after the sale takes place, that they've sold to somebody else that has a different expectation. So now you're reselling and hoping to keep that business and hoping it's still the right client and the right terms. So there's a lot of work that goes on initially, and then I think Amy mentioned it, the long-term maintenance and investment in relationships and expertise, knowledge, resources does not stop. And it's a constant, you have to know, keep your eyes open and know you're stepping into it, because it's not easy. If it was easy, everyone would do it. But it's something that is something to keep in mind when you're expanding outside of your own house.
Bubba, going back to you, in terms of the ancillary businesses, the many different ones, how do you think about it in terms of the symbiosis with the core business lines? How would you think about that? What is the most popular one from that perspective when you all are discussing it internally? Or is there one?
You know, I think, well, part of our mission statement is, you know, and we talk about care being our business. And so to me, it's kind of hard to separate out what is our core business versus what are our ancillary services, because again, you're providing, if you put that patient in the center of everything you do, all of these services contribute to the well-being and the improvement in those patients' lives. I do think, however, that you know, when you think of it more as a medical model, with the physician and the nurse being there in the middle, that really is core to taking care of that patient. But those ancillaries, they have to be a support. They can't be a hindrance to and a struggle back and forth. They have to always be supportive. You know, I'll give a real quick example. Our pharmacy, I don't know, I guess it was back in the fall, one of our pharmacies, we had some heavy storms and the roof was torn off of our pharmacy building. It was really amazing to watch our team come together from all disciplines to make sure that we never missed a delivery for those patients. And so when we think about core, I think it's responsibility of everyone.
Bill, can I ask a question here? Because as y'all have been talking about this, how do you think about the value of those ancillary product lines, or your non-core SNF or assisted living? Like, do you think about it in one big bucket? Because there's puts and takes, right? Like, hospice is a great hospice in your MA plan. Like, there's some puts and takes there. Certainly, you were just talking about your inpatient behavioral health. Well, you're taking somebody out of one of your settings and moving to another. How do you think about the big picture finances here?
It's an interesting question, and I think over the years, the answers have been fairly fragmented, right? And your payer sources out there, and you're trying to do everything you can to get paid, and rehab's focused on rehab stuff and their minutes, and pharmacies just trying to get the meds delivered accurately and safely. And I will say early on, even if we had rehab and pharmacy in an external contract, they often didn't even know that we were both serving that customer.
Yep.
It was an observation. But what I'm seeing happen in this industry with population health is, Bubba mentioned it goes back to the clinical care provided. And what I'm seeing with these advanced clinical practitioners, helping patients stay healthier, helping residents age in place, intervening faster, not having the ED visits, not having the readmissions, and communicating with rehab now that rehab's under PDPM is essentially a cost, or under a managed care plan is essentially a cost. What is the right amount of rehab? And the pharmacy doing medication management, going, okay, are these the right drugs for this resident to keep them healthy and aging in place? Or are we spending more money than we need to, or do these drugs interact? And we started doing heavy medication management, especially in our Age Right plan and our post-acute network, where everyone is focused on, regardless of what the finances look like, it's less fragmented, and we're looking at it more kind of as an overall picture. Doesn't mean we ignore, because we're in a lot of states where managed care is not very heavy and things are still pretty fragmented, or we're in a lot of facilities where we only have pharmacies, so we're only really looking at the pharmacy financials or the rehab financials.
Right.
But internally, as Marquis has shifted towards this population health model and really looked at the patient and what is best for the patient, and we've found that financially, when you put the patient first, financially it's all working out because we're doing the right thing and we're keeping them healthy. And so our medical losses are significantly lower when that whole team is working together and understands this is why we're doing this with pharmacy, this is why we consult here, this is why rehab's doing this. And it's been, and that advanced clinical practitioner was a game changer. Is not having your traditional nursing home where a patient gets sick at night, the nurse freaks out, doesn't know what to do, and they just call the hospital and they admit the patient or take it to the ED. When you have an advanced clinical practitioner who can evaluate, be on site, nip things in the bud instead of letting things get too far, it has just completely been a game changer in how we look at all of our ancillaries.
So I think with the time remaining, I want to hit on one other question, then we'll maybe open it up to the audience, but kind of along the lines of the valuation discussion, would love to hit on the topic of acquisition and how the ancillary business factors in. Bubba, would love to start with you in terms of if you're acquiring a skilled nursing or senior housing asset, how does the fact that the ancillary business lines are there, how does that factor into the valuation model? There's been a lot of discussion about that over the last few years, so would love to hear some of that.
Well, I mean, I think we've talked a lot about that already. When we look at potentially acquiring a new asset, we have to consider, how many of those patients may become part of our ISNP plan. How many of those are going to be needing pharmaceuticals? All of those things have to factor in, and you have to be able to figure out how to put a dollar value on that, which can be challenging. But I think we're getting more and more sophisticated on the data that we're able to collect. You know, I had a discussion last evening about that. Is that when I came into this sector, you know, 7 years ago, we didn't have a lot of data, and today sometimes we have more data than we want. But being able to use that data and being able to apply that on looking at a new service, how many patients we're going to be bringing in, I really think contributes to the value of the asset. Sometimes the seller doesn't see that so much as the buyer.
Okay. Amy, Laurie, any other piece to add from that perspective?
I would just say that I think, again, eyes wide open, looking at the data and asking yourself the question, you know, depending on which state you're in, which customers you're serving, that value is going to look different. But, you know, making sure that you've done a lot of due diligence and a lot of asking the question, if I'm going to buy this pharmacy, what additional value might come with that? What additional growth might come with that? Where that might team us up with a potential rehab partner, or if we're in a state like Oregon, is this someone that we could get into our network and sign them up with our iSNP or our C-SNP? So it's a hard question to answer, and I think the other thing that's been difficult is the squeeze on the margins and ancillaries over the last couple of years has been pretty significant, and so taking valuations that were done on purchases that were done 5 to 10 years ago don't even apply anymore. You really have to look at what's happening today and what's happening with reimbursement and the impact of our increased costs and inflation over the next 5 to 10 years, and being really honest about that and not saying, oh, this is going to be great. And then as a lot of deals happen after the acquisition, 2-3 years afterwards, they're like, gosh, this sure didn't live up to the expectations. And why is that? So being really honest and being careful to not overvalue the asset.
All right, well, thank you. We'd love to open it up to the audience here. I think we have about 10 minutes left or so for some questions. We have one right here in the front. And okay, go ahead.
My question is, what kind of capitals does an ancillary business involve? And could you give us some info into what kind of margins do they make? Thank you.
So margins on the ancillary businesses. I think, you know, you can look at some industry averages, but they're going to vary significantly. I think you can look at a pharmacy EBITDA today, and it may be sitting around 5%, which is about half of what it might have been 5 years ago. And not only that, but we're facing some serious headwinds with the IRA, with the reduction in the insulin prices, with the reduction of other Part D, with the squeeze from the SNFs on trying to get the prices lower, the increased on staffing cost and delivery cost. And so we've got some serious headwinds on the pharmacy side. Rehab can also be very different. Pre-PDPM, you may have seen, you know, margins in the 10 to 15% range. Post-PDPM, very different, because you've got to manage it completely different. Still provide quality care, but manage it in a completely different way than we did prior to that reimbursement change. And so, and there's not any public traded rehab companies out there to really look and do any kind of public comparison to what those margins are. So some of this is just speculation and just, you know, our industry networking.
I think it's always shifting too, you know, as we see this continuous move towards managed care, you know, our margins are always changing, and so it's something that we have to stay on top of. You know, we're seeing less and less Part B in the rehab environment, so you know, I think it's somewhat of a moving target.
Question here. Oh, Priscilla, go ahead. There's one right here as well in the front row.
This one's for Bubba. Bubba, you're in lots of different business lines, but I didn't hear you say that you're in the physician business.
Physician?
Sorry, Amy, don't mean to, you know, cause a wedge, but just, you know, if they're the quarterback for all the care, right, I would have guessed that you would have contemplated your own physicians?
Yeah, it's interesting that you asked that question. Amy and I were just up here talking before the session started. Is we currently don't employ any physicians, but what we're seeing, and I'm sure others in the audience see the same thing, is for many years we've relied on the local physician that comes in and sees his patient once every 6 months or something. but because of the level of patients that we're receiving now, they require more care. So what we do have through our plan is we have a nurse practitioner program, and those nurse practitioners around. But I do think that a physician model is probably on our horizon.
I too am wondering about ancillary services beyond rehab and pharmacy. I know, Bubba, you mentioned behavioral health, but have any of your organizations considered audiology, podiatry, optometry, dental? If yes, how has that gone? And if no, why not?
The one we did some pretty extensive research this year on dialysis, and starting dialysis in some of our buildings. Another area is infusion, and those are things that are still being considered right now. But again, it's how do you control the care of those patients? And we all know sending a patient out of a facility to go to dialysis is not the best for that patient, and so that's something that we're exploring currently.
Yeah, and for us, when I think about our primary and preventive care model, we have made the decision to do some things. We both have brought behavioral health in as part of the model. We also have some great partnerships, for example, around behavioral health. So we've taken a little bit of a mixed approach. But I also think about it in terms of the hierarchy of control, right? What's most important for us to control? And for us, it is primary care. We want to make sure we are in control of that. We want to make sure we're in control of the preventive services that go along with primary care. And so as we think as we broaden out from that, behavioral health is a great next step because it really should be part of the primary care experience, especially for the population that we serve. Some of the other things that you mentioned, audiology, podiatry, for example, those are great examples for us of where we can find good partners who can do that for us. We don't need to have the direct control. We just need to have really strong partnerships there. So that's the approach we've taken so far. We don't feel like we need to be a one-stop shop for everything, but we do need to be the quarterback and coordinate all of those services. That's more important to us.
And I would echo Amy, we've taken that same approach, and we've looked at dialysis, currently looking at it because, again, it's so disruptive, and we have a couple of facilities that have space where we would contract that out. I don't know that we would own it. Again, you kind of have to know what your areas of expertise, and I don't think we want to own podiatrist or audiologist or if we have relationships. And if we've got the relationships and they're good relationships, that's worked for us. So we haven't gone outside of that. Although I didn't mention we do in our PAC network, we are part owner in radiology group as well.
All right, any other questions? One more? Sure.
Since there aren't any more, I do have a second one. I'm just wondering, do facilities need to be concerned with any potential violation of anti-kickback, fraud, Stark law, things like that when partnering or subcontracting these services out?
I'll start that, and you guys can fill in. Yes, you need to be aware of that, and you need to understand where your boundaries are.
Yep.
Like, for example, when we established our PAC network, we use a messenger model.
Yep.
And when we look at pharmacy partner joint ventures, we usually start with a zero value because we're just starting a pharmacy from ground up. And there are a lot of other customers that we're servicing. Rehab, it's a little bit tougher, and I have not gone down that path, and there's been some, I've not seen that be successful. But you do have to be aware, make sure you've got a good attorney, so you're looking at all of those. But I think we've all found ways to successfully do it without adding what we felt would be additional risk.
I think you could probably speak to that
Well,
with your physician practice.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It is something that we pay a whole lot of attention to, especially, again, through our physician practices. It is a potential concern, and so you do need to make sure that you have very strong legal support. You need to make sure that it is state-specific, obviously. And you need to build that into the business model. The good thing now is, there are some regulatory safe havens that you should ask about. If any of you have gotten into some of these relationships or in some of the network relationships, for example, clinical integration is very important. Your technology is very important. It can help you out there. So there are ways to manage it, but you absolutely need to be aware of it before you really complete your business plan and start funding something.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, when you look at pharmacy, we think SNFs are highly regulated. I mean, pharmacies, it's just amazing how structured and difficult it can be to manage within that regulatory environment. And so, that's something else that you have to take into consideration, and we have to have strong legal support in order to do that.
Great question.
All right, well, thank you all so much for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of the conference.
Thank you.
So thank you. Thank you, Bubba, Amy, Lori, and Bill, for your keen insights on when it's right, with the right partner, that you can better the patient's life. And Bubba, love the image of the relay race and in passing that baton and keeping it in the air. So much thanks. We very much would welcome your feedback on our educational sessions, and to provide us the feedback on this session, either use the QR code that you see on the screen now, or one of the two kiosks as you exit the room. Please share with us your thoughts. We're now heading into a 60-minute or 1-hour break for lunch, and lunch is available in the Nick Cafe. Our upcoming sessions then at the 1 o'clock hour. On the main stage, the session's titled Innovative Housing Solutions in Active Adult Communities, and within the Innovation Lab is Enhancing Health Outcomes Through Innovation, Tech-Enhanced Senior Living. So we'll see you back here at the 1 o'clock hour. Thank you all.